Hello to the amazing audience of Sci-Fi stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has disabled the monetization feature of our channel, leaving us with no budget to operate. If you find today's story entertaining, please consider supporting us with just $1, so the channel can have the budget to pay our hardworking staff, allowing them to cover their living expenses and continue creating more stories to serve you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on the screen, or by clicking the PayPal link in the description or the comments section of this video. Thank you so much. The air on Zirac tasted of rust and static. Here, a human life was worth less than a stripped fusion coil. Austin Banks tightened his grip on his heavy wrench, wiping the gritty red dust from his cracked visor. He was just a scavenger, a primate among the towering cybernetic lords of the salvage yards. But beneath the suffocating dunes of this dead world, something ancient was waiting to remember exactly who he was. The crimson sun baked the violently cracked surface of the planet, turning the endless scrapyards into a sprawling oven of jagged metal and despair. Austin exhaled slowly, watching his breath briefly fog the inner glass of his environmental suit. He was an Earth-born salvage technician, though the official employment registry of the sector listed his species merely as manual labor class grade 4. Working here under the crushing authority of the Zenth, a human was barely considered a sentient creature. The Zenth were towering behemoths of augmented cybernetics and cold logic, their original biological forms having been long replaced by heavy hydraulic limbs and glowing sensory optics. They ruled the scrap trade of this desolate sector with an arrogant brutality, paying Austin a miserable wage of merely 10 credits for every standard rotation. Across the deep canyon of rusted dreadnoughts, a crew of Zenth workers was tearing into the fuselage of a decommissioned cargo hauler. They relied entirely on gravity tethers and plasma rams, violently ripping the thick armored plating apart, with absolutely zero regard for the structural integrity of the vessel. The ground shook violently as a massive chunk of the hull collapsed, sending a dangerous shower of sparks into the dry atmosphere. Austin shook his head silently, keeping a safe distance from their reckless operation. When it came to extracting the highly unstable zero-point energy cores buried deep within these wrecks, raw strength was nothing but a rapid death sentence. Austin worked differently. He did not rely on brute force or violent machinery. He used his bare hands, guided by raw human intuition and a meticulous understanding of physical load distribution. He listened closely to the subtle whining frequencies of failing containment fields, where the Zenth saw only worthless scrap waiting to be crushed. Austin saw a delicate metallic skeleton that needed to be surgically and respectfully dismantled. He would quietly defuse the dangerous cores that the heavy Zenth scanners declared critically unstable, sliding the volatile cylinders free from their housings without triggering a single thermal spike. It was a quiet, thankless art form that the machines above him could never comprehend. The routine monotony of the exhausting graveyard shift was abruptly shattered when the horizon turned a bruised, violent shade of purple. The base warning sirens wailed across the canyon. An anomalous kinetic sandstorm roared into existence out of nowhere, moving vastly faster than any natural weather pattern recorded on this barren rock. The screech of the abrasive red sand, violently lashing against metal, was deafening. The sudden storm hit the excavation site like a massive physical hammer, instantly blowing away the upper layers of the electrostatic stratosphere and stripping the topsoil completely bare. As quickly as it arrived, the howling wind died down, leaving an eerie, suffocating silence in its wake. The thick red dust slowly settled, revealing a sight that made the Zenth sensory optics flash in rapid, confused error patterns. Buried deep beneath the bedrock was a colossal, seamless metal dome. It was forged from a matte, light-devouring black material that seemed to absorb the ambient heat of the desert entirely. It bore no visible structural seams, no exhaust ports, and completely defied every single architectural aesthetic registered in the vast and ancient database of the Galactic Council. The Zenth Site Supervisor, a massive mechanical entity designated with 3 brightly glowing optical sensors, stomped heavily toward the edge of the newly formed pit. He pointed a heavy, metallic digit down at the black dome, then slowly turned his terrifying gaze to Austin. "You, primate, proceed into the excavation pit and initiate a manual surface inspection." The command was completely devoid of malice, which somehow made it significantly worse. It was an expression of pure, calculated indifference. To the Zenth Supervisor, the life of a soft, incompletely evolved organism from a backwater dirt planet was infinitely expendable. If the mysterious black structure housed automated defense grids or lethal radiation traps, losing a human was vastly cheaper and far more convenient than risking the destruction of a valuable diagnostic drone. Austin swallowed the dry lump forming in his throat. He did not argue. Arguing with a Zenth always ended with broken bones and heavily docked pay. He simply nodded, activated his magnetic boots, and began the steep, treacherous climb down into the freshly carved crater. The air grew noticeably colder with every single step he took toward the massive dome. The oppressive, sweltering heat of Zirak was completely neutralized within a radius of 20 meters from the dark hull. Austin stopped at the very base of the towering black wall, his breath catching in his chest. Every alien vessel he had ever touched throughout his long career emitted a distinct electromagnetic repulsion, a faint static hum that naturally warned outsiders to stay away. This structure was entirely different. He slowly reached out, his thick, insulated glove hovering just a few millimeters from the strange surface. Taking a deep breath, he pressed his palm flat against the cold, dead metal. There was no violent shock. There was no energy force field pushing him back. Instead, a deep, resonant mechanical vibration surged through the thick hull. The slow, rhythmic thumping traveled directly up his arm and sank straight into his bone marrow. It was not a random machine noise. It was a deliberate, steady pulse. And as Austin stood there in the chilling shadow of the unknown giant, he realized with a profound sense of awe that the deep vibration was perfectly synchronized with the beating of his very own heart. The heavy thud of hydraulic limbs against the packed red dirt signaled the arrival of the Zenth extraction team. Sliding down the steep incline of the newly formed crater, the site supervisor aggressively pushed his way to the front of the formation. In his massive, pincer-like manipulator, he held a military-grade quantum resonance scanner. He swept the device over the sprawling black dome, expecting a flood of structural schematics and metallurgical data. Instead, the high-pitched whine of the scanner choked into a dull, erratic clicking sound. The holographic interface violently flickered, displaying nothing but cascading error codes before the screen went entirely dark. The quantum entanglement matrix inside the device had been completely neutralized by the ambient aura of the hull. The supervisor clicked his mandibles in mounting frustration, his internal translation unit broadcasting a harsh, metallic screech. The surrounding Zenth laborers took a synchronized step backward through the harsh bleeps of their localized communication network. The supervisor declared his terrifying hypothesis. He stated the anomaly could only be a relic of the predecessors. That ancient title alone carried enough psychological weight to make even these emotionless cybernetic giants hesitate. In the sprawling lore of the Galactic Council, the predecessors were the ultimate ghost story. They were a mythical, godlike civilization of unprecedented technological supremacy that had swept across the cosmos exactly 5,000 years ago. Historical records dictated that they had violently cleansed half of the known galaxy of all rival empires before vanishing completely, leaving behind nothing but dead star systems and unreadable technology. To find a fully intact piece of their lost architecture was an absolute miracle, an artifact of such immeasurable value that it could purchase entire solar systems outright. Blind, consuming greed instantly overrode any programmed safety protocols within the Zenth supervisor. Desperate to be the first biological entity to physically secure the artifact, he lunged forward toward the darkest section of the hull. In his frantic rush, his massive armored shoulder slammed violently into Austin. The sudden impact threw the much smaller human completely off his center of gravity, stumbling sideways along the curve of the dome. Austin desperately swept his hands across the cold metal to brace his fall. To his naked eye, the surface appeared perfectly smooth, but concealed within the matte, black finish was a microscopic seam, a defensive edge honed to the thinness of a single molecule. The sharp sting was utterly instantaneous. A deep, agonizing gash opened straight across the palm of his hand. A single, heavy drop of crimson blood fell from the fresh wound. It did not splatter uselessly against the cold exterior of the hull. The very microsecond the biological fluid made contact, the impenetrable black metal rippled outward like a pool of dark liquid obsidian. The droplet of blood was instantly absorbed, vanishing into the thick armor plating as if the silent Leviathan had physically inhaled it. A profound, suffocating silence fell over the excavation pit. Then, the dead vessel finally took a breath. A blinding cascade of sapphire blue energy suddenly flared to life beneath the dust. Brilliant, pulsating azure light surged through intricate, circuit-like grooves that spider-webbed across the entirety of the colossal hull. The desolate floor of the dead world was bathed in a magnificent, glowing aura before the stunned optical sensors of the scavengers. A massive section of the seamless exterior wall smoothly detached and receded inward. It slid away into the bulkheads to reveal a gaping, illuminated airlock. There was absolutely zero mechanical friction, no grinding of ancient gears, and no venting of atmospheric pressure. The sheer, silent perfection of the mechanism was a terrifying display of engineering superiority. The Zenth supervisor practically vibrated with avarice. A fully functional predecessor airlock stood open right in front of him. He viciously backhanded Austin, sending the human crashing heavily face first into the freezing, abrasive mud, with heavy, stomping strides. The supervisor and two of his elite heavily armored guards rushed the open hatchway, eager to claim the ultimate glory of the discovery for their own designated neural lineage. They crossed the glowing threshold with their weapons drawn. The trap they triggered did not involve primitive plasma fire or explosive shrapnel. It was infinitely more elegant and immeasurably more brutal. A localized extreme gravity shear field activated precisely within the confines of the airlock. The invisible kinetic force slammed down from the ceiling with the unimaginable weight of a collapsing star. The dense, heavily reinforced exoskeletons of the Zenth guards simply imploded upon themselves. The sickening, echoing crunch of twisting ultradense alloy and shattering optical lenses filled the crater. The overwhelming gravitational pressure compressed their massive mechanical frames into jagged, sparking cubes of useless scrap metal in a fraction of a second. The automated defense grid then violently ejected their ruined, smoking remains back out into the dirt, rolling them to a stop just inches from where Austin lay. Austin remained paralyzed in the mud, gasping for breath, his chest heaving as he stared wide-eyed at the smoking wreckage of his ruthless overseers. As he tried to process the hyper-violent execution, a voice spoke. It did not echo from the cavernous depths of the open ship, nor did it transmit through his external communication earpiece. The sound manifested perfectly, clearly, and directly inside the center of his own cerebral cortex. The tone was artificially synthesized, but possessed a chilling, incredibly calm authority. And most shockingly of all, It was not speaking the universal galactic common dialect required by planetary law. It was speaking perfect, unaccented English. Confirmed primeval deoxyribonucleic acid sequence. Canceling 50 millennia containment seal. Welcome back, Captain. Austin completely froze, his breathing stalling in his throat. His brilliant mind raced, desperately trying to deconstruct the impossible, world-shattering implications of those exact words. 50 millennia, 50,000 years. The predecessors. The mythical, terrifying demons of the cosmos who had brought the entire known universe to its knees and reshaped the stars in their wake, were not some horrific, unknown alien monstrosity. They were human. Long before his supposedly primitive species had crawled out of the irradiated ashes of Earth. Long before they had consciously chosen to wipe away their own majestic, terrifying history to start over as a frail race. They had ruled the infinite dark, the greatest, most feared empire in the recorded history of the galactic spiral was not lost to time. It had merely been waiting, and with a single drop of blood, he had just commanded it to wake up. The concussive shockwave from the gravity shear provided the perfect tactical cover. Austin immediately allowed his entire muscular system to go limp, burying his reinforced helmet directly into the frozen, blood-stained mud. He consciously slowed his heart rate and restricted his breathing to a shallow, irregular rhythm, flawlessly simulating the severe biological trauma of a massive kinetic impact. Above him, in the dark sky, the steep canyon walls echoed with the harsh, mechanical shrieks of approaching Zenth patrol units. Heavy anti-gravity troop transports were already descending rapidly, their piercing searchlights slicing through the heavily saturated red dust. If the alien authorities suspected for a single millisecond that a lowly human technician had triggered the ancient anomaly and survived the encounter, they would flawlessly vivisect his brain for the biometric data. He had to remain entirely insignificant and completely helpless in their optics. Keeping his eyes tightly shut against the abrasive dirt, Austin focused his entire mental bandwidth on the synthesized voice, still echoing within his cerebral cortex. He did not speak aloud, knowing their audio sensors were highly sensitive. Instead, he directed his conscious thought toward the profound presence in his mind. Utilizing a strict mental discipline he had honed through years of analyzing complex system architectures in absolute silence. Valiant. Establish a secure neural handshake. Read-only access. Acknowledge. Handshake confirmed. Captain, neural syncing at 100% capacity. Awaiting your command parameters. The mental connection was terrifyingly seamless. There was absolutely no latency, no data buffering, just a pristine, overwhelming flow of pure information streaming directly into his visual cortex. In the brief span of 30 seconds, Austin completely downloaded the uncensored, uncorrupted historical archive of the entire known galaxy. The sheer magnitude of the truth hit his consciousness with the explosive force of a supernova, yet his external biological signs remained completely flat and steady under the approaching searchlights. The ruling Galactic Council had built their entire religious and political foundation on a monumental lie. The human ancestors, the terrifying entities known as the predecessors, were never a race of mindless conquerors. They were the ultimate galactic immune system. Exactly 50,000 years ago, a devastating extra-dimensional parasite had violently breached this plane of reality, a biological corruption that actively fed on the fusion energy of living stars. To starve the entity and save the galaxy from total consumption, the Earth Empire had made the ultimate strategic sacrifice. They deliberately collapsed their own supreme civilization, sealing their vast, invincible armadas deep underground across thousands of dead worlds to trap the parasitic swarm within a localized temporal quarantine zone. But the most chilling revelation of all was the true origin of the current ruling classes. The Zenth, the proud and arrogant mechanical lords who treated humanity like disposable vermin, were nothing more than the distant descendants of bioengineered janitorial drones. The ancient human empire had seeded their rudimentary ancestors across the stars, simply to maintain the basic ecological balance and sweep up the planetary debris while the human masters slept. Over 50 millennia. The automated janitorial units had evolved, completely forgotten their original servitude programming, and built a massive empire directly on top of the silent ruins of their sleeping creators. A cold, profound clarity washed over Austin. He was currently lying face down in the dirt, surrounded by the heavily armed mechanical descendants of his great ancestors' garbage collectors. The sheer irony of the situation was so incredibly sharp, it almost forced him to break his facade and smile. But he maintained his paralyzed state with absolute iron control. Valiant. Analyze the current tactical situation immediately, Austin commanded through their mental link, keeping his internal tone entirely detached and strictly professional. Hostile fleet converging in upper orbit. Zenth battlecruisers currently numbering 342 vessels. Ground suppression forces are mobilizing. I am fully armed and ready to initiate the atmospheric cleansing protocol. Give the word, Captain, and I will reduce their entire armada to subatomic vapor in exactly 4 seconds. The raw, unfathomable destructive power resting right at his fingertips was wildly intoxicating. He was linked to a warship that possessed weaponry capable of casually unmaking entire planets. But Austin was a meticulous engineer first and foremost. He knew that revealing their ultimate hand too early would be a fatal, amateur error. The Galactic Council controlled thousands of highly militarized star systems. If a single human suddenly unleashed a fully functional predecessor dreadnought, it would instantly unite every single alien species in a frantic, desperate crusade to exterminate Earth before humanity could reclaim its ancestral throne. He needed strategic leverage, not just a localized massacre. Negative. Valiant. Belay that order completely. Do not engage any targets. We are playing dead. You are to immediately enter a zero-emission stealth state. Reroute all primary power cores to the deep thermal heat sinks. Shut down the visual energy traces on your exterior hull. Project a false radiation signature, indicating a catastrophic containment failure within your primary airlock structure. Make them believe the ship is permanently broken and highly toxic to approach. Acknowledged. Captain. Engaging the Phantom Protocol now. Powering down all visible energy arrays. Warning. Hostile biological units are currently establishing a perimeter around your physical location. The brilliant sapphire veins that had illuminated the black dome instantly faded into dull, lifeless nothingness. The massive open airlock, which had just brutally crushed the Zenth overseer, violently slammed shut, sealing itself tightly with a loud hiss of simulated depressurization. To the highly advanced but ultimately flawed Zenth scanners, the miraculous artifact now looked exactly like a dead, irradiated tomb that had tragically malfunctioned upon its initial awakening. Heavy metallic boots pounded the dry ground, right near his head. Rough, mechanical hands grabbed Austin by his armored shoulders, violently dragging his limp body out of the mud. He let his entire frame hang loose like a discarded rag doll, offering absolutely zero physical resistance, as a Zenth medical officer swept a diagnostic beam aggressively over his suit to confirm he was still breathing, while the towering aliens barked confused and angry orders at each other, heavily frustrated by the suddenly dark and silent artifact they could no longer access. Austin went to work deep within the hidden shadows of his own mind. He did not need the ancient ship to fire a single plasma battery. He possessed a weapon that was far more dangerous than raw firepower. He had its supreme sensor array. Valiant, Austin commanded silently, as the guards tossed him roughly toward a detainment transport. Activate passive quantum telemetry mode. I want a full, microscopic structural diagnostic of every single Zenth vessel currently holding orbital position above Zyrak. Map their entire network topology and isolate their central command nodes. Scanning process initiated. Data acquired successfully. Their engineering parameters are highly primitive. I am currently detecting severe architectural flaws in their plasma containment relays and unencrypted vulnerabilities in their centralized communication nodes. Austin smiled on the inside, keeping his face a mask of pain and exhaustion. Through the omniscient eyes of his ancestral warship, the mighty, terrifying Zenth Armada was completely laid bare. He easily identified the microscopic stress fractures hiding within their heavy orbital cruisers. He saw the blatant, unencrypted backdoors, completely exposing their fleet communication grids. He methodically memorized every single blind spot, every unshielded exhaust port, and every fragile command link tying their forces together. The arrogant alien overlords genuinely believed they were capturing a broken machine and securing a worthless, fragile human slave. They had absolutely no idea they had just personally invited a master human architect straight into the very foundation of their empire. Austin allowed himself to be thrown onto the cold metal floor of the detainment transport, his mind silently, coldly calculating the exact mathematical coordinates of their impending doom. The Supreme Commander of the Zenth Orbital Fleet did not merely land upon the surface of Zyrak. He descended like a mechanical god, demanding absolute submission from the very ground he walked upon. His personal heavily armored dropship shattered the atmospheric silence, touching down violently near the perimeter of the dark excavation site. He completely ignored the blaring automated warnings regarding the fabricated radiation leaks surrounding the dormant vessel. Accompanied by a highly specialized cadre of cybernetic cryptographers and heavy demolition units, his singular goal was to forcibly breach the ancient core of the ship. They brought massive resonance drills and quantum decryption engines, blindly confident that their brute force methods could shatter technology built 50 millennia ago. For 3 agonizing hours, their most advanced machinery ground against the pitch-black hull of the silent Leviathan, yielding absolutely zero results. The metal absorbed their lasers, deflected their kinetic impactors, and scrambled their logic processors. As the commander surveyed the smoking wreckage of the initial exploration team, his brightly glowing optical sensors locked onto the only biological entity still possessing a pulse within the immediate vicinity. Austin Banks was violently dragged from the detainment transport, his limp body thrown mercilessly at the heavily armored feet of the highest-ranking Zenth in the entire sector. The commander calculated the statistical improbability of a fragile human surviving a localized gravity shear and reached a single, brutal conclusion. This insignificant primate possessed the ancient access code. They did not waste a single second with rudimentary questioning or basic diplomatic protocols. Austin was immediately transported into the sterile, freezing bowels of the Supreme Commander flagship, a massive battlecruiser hovering ominously just above the toxic clouds of the dead planet. The primary interrogation chamber was a sensory deprivation nightmare, composed entirely of smooth, featureless gray alloys designed to completely disorient the prisoner. Austin was violently strapped into a towering vertical restraint chair situated in the absolute center of the room. Heavy, freezing metallic clamps locked his wrists, his ankles, and his neck into a rigidly immobile posture. He could not turn his head even a fraction of an inch. The Zenth interrogation specialist did not ask him politely for the information. Instead, they approached him with thick, invasive neural interface cables. They attached the cold sensory nodes directly to his temples, effectively forcing a direct physical bridge between his biological brain and their massive digital extraction mainframe. The Supreme Commander stood directly in front of him, his massive metallic frame radiating intense heat and oppressive, terrifying authority. "You will surrender the ancient cipher," the commander demanded, his synthesized voice echoing harshly off the metal walls. "Your fragile biological mind cannot comprehend the architecture you have triggered. Give me the override command, primate, or I will peel the memories from your cortex layer by layer." When Austin remained completely silent, the commander initiated the neuro-forced sonic wave sequence. Invisible pulses of agonizing sound battered against Austin from every single conceivable angle. The frequency was specifically calibrated to bypass the eardrums entirely and vibrate directly against the human nervous system. It was a torture method designed to shatter the sanity of the subject and liquefy their mental defenses within a matter of minutes. The intense, burning pain was mathematically calculated to force the victim into instantly surrendering every single memory they possessed just to make the noise stop. The towering alien overlords fully expected the weak, unevolved human to completely break down. They waited for him to scream, to beg for mercy, and to violently thrash against his unyielding restraints until his spirit was permanently shattered. They were entirely unprepared for the chilling reality of pure human resilience. Austin did not scream. He did not cry out. He closed his eyes and retreated deeply into the absolute center of his own consciousness. He utilized highly advanced military-grade meditation techniques and autonomic biological control protocols he had relentlessly drilled into his mind years ago. He consciously forced his heart rate to plummet, dropping it from 90 beats per minute down to a dangerously slow, steady 40 beats per minute. He systematically disconnected his pain receptors from his active thought processes, isolating the agony into a distant, detached corner of his brain. To the deeply frustrated Zenth observers actively monitoring his vital signs, it was mathematically impossible. The human was simply sitting there, breathing softly, his face an unreadable mask of perfect, terrifying tranquility. He absorbed their most sophisticated psychological warfare with the immovable patience of a mountain weathering a pathetic storm. The Supreme Commander dialed the sonic frequency to the maximum lethal threshold, pouring 100% of their reactor power into the torture device. His heavy mandibles clicked furiously in mounting uncontrollable rage. Yet, Austin merely tilted his head slightly, opening his eyes to stare directly into the blinding optical sensors of his captor with an expression of cold, calculated pity. What the arrogant cybernetic entities completely failed to realize was the fatal vulnerability of their own interrogation methods. By physically attaching their deepest neural extraction cables directly to his head, they had unwittingly created a massive, unshielded bridge straight into their Central Fleet command network. They genuinely thought they were hacking into his primitive mind. They were profoundly and catastrophically wrong. While Austin sat perfectly still under the agonizing sonic bombardment, he silently opened the mental floodgates. He allowed the ancient artificial intelligence named Valiant to surge straight through his consciousness and travel directly up the enemy cables. It was an absolute digital slaughter. Valiant moved through the Zenth command superstructure with terrifying speed and absolute silence. The ancient warship effortlessly bypassed their primitive security firewalls in a fraction of a second. It silently injected a highly virulent logic virus into the very foundation of their orbital fleet matrix, spreading the infection to all 342 vessels simultaneously. The human did not need to physically move a single muscle to completely dismantle their massive empire. Deep within the hidden layers of the Zenth flagship, red warning lights began to flash silently. The interrogation equipment violently sparked and sputtered, the excruciating sonic waves suddenly dying out into a pathetic, static hiss as the localized power grid suffered a massive, inexplicable cascading failure. The Supreme Commander slammed his heavy fists violently against the malfunctioning control console, absolutely furious that his superior machinery was failing him during such a critical extraction, completely losing his engineered patience and abandoning all logic. The massive alien drew a heavy plasma sidearm. He pointed the glowing, highly energized barrel directly at the exact center of Austin's forehead. He prepared to execute the stubborn human and carve the answers directly from his dead brain tissue. Slowly, deliberately, Austin raised his head. He looked straight past the lethal weapon, feeling the triumphant hum of Valiant echoing in his mind, and smiled. It was a terrifying predator smile that completely shattered the cold composure of his alien captor. Austin spoke softly, his voice perfectly steady and completely devoid of fear. "You just locked the door from the outside." The heavy plasma weapon hummed with lethal intent, the searing heat of its muzzle mere inches from Austin's forehead. The Supreme Commander narrowed his optical sensors, anticipating the satisfying flash of vaporized biological tissue. He pulled the heavy trigger. Instead of a devastating beam of superheated energy, the weapon emitted a pathetic, dying click. At that exact microsecond, the freezing metallic restraints locking Austin to the interrogation chair abruptly disengaged, sliding backward into the armrests with a soft pneumatic hiss. Valiant had already rewritten the local command architecture of the room. Austin slowly lowered his arms, rubbing his bruised wrists. He looked directly at the towering cybernetic overlord, with a fluid, almost theatrical grace. Austin raised his right hand and executed a simple, sharp snap of his fingers. The acoustic crack of the snap was instantly followed by a violent, stomach-churning lurch. Through his secure neural link, Austin had commanded Valiant to completely invert the artificial gravity plating localized within the interrogation chamber. The gravitational constant instantly violently shifted from standard planetary pull to a complete vertical reversal. The Supreme Commander and his 4 heavily armored elite guards, collectively weighing several tons of dense cybernetic alloy, were violently ripped from the floor. They crashed heavily against the smooth ceiling of the room, their heavy limbs flailing wildly in sudden, disorienting zero-gravity chaos. Their massive frames, perfectly engineered to crush enemies under immense pressure on solid ground, became catastrophic liabilities in a weightless environment. Austin did not fall. He anticipated the shift perfectly. As the gravitational field flipped, he merely pushed off the floor with the precise, calculated force of a coiled spring. He soared upward, entirely weightless, navigating the chaotic airspace with the lethal grace of an apex predator swimming through deep water. The heavy Zenth guards attempted to track his rapid movement, desperately swiping their massive mechanical claws through the empty air. Austin easily twisted his body mid-flight, narrowly dodging a heavy metallic fist that smashed into the bulkhead. He did not attempt to strike the thick armor plating. Instead, he targeted the microscopic biological joints that held their massive cybernetic frames together. He grabbed the extended arm of the first guard, using the massive creature's own forward momentum as a pivot point. Austin swung his entire body weight around the limb, locking his boots perfectly against the guard's shoulder joint. With a sharp, agonizing twist of his torso, Austin applied maximum leverage to the biomechanical elbow servo. The joint snapped backward with a sickening crunch of tearing metal and bursting hydraulic fluid. The guard emitted a digitized scream of agony, spinning wildly out of control and slamming directly into a second guard. Austin used the collapsing enemy as a springboard, launching himself violently toward the third target. He slipped gracefully underneath a desperate, sweeping strike, wrapping his arms around the guard's knee actuator. He forcefully kicked the opposing joint, extending the leg backward until the vital stabilization piston shattered completely. Within 45 seconds, 4 elite Zenth warriors were rendered completely immobile, reduced to floating heaps of sparking metal and leaking fluids. Austin had not broken a single drop of sweat. He floated calmly in the center of the room, adjusting his stance. The Supreme Commander, furious and deeply humiliated, finally managed to magnetically lock his heavy boots to the ceiling. "You fragile parasite! You cannot defeat the absolute power of the Zenth," the commander roared, launching himself downward with both fists extended to crush the human. Austin simply waited until the massive alien was mere inches away, then mentally commanded Valiant to instantly restore standard gravity. The commander plummeted tragically, face first, into the unyielding steel floor, the sheer weight of his own armor violently crushing his chest, plating inward. He lay there, utterly defeated by simple physics, simultaneously, thousands of miles below the orbital cruiser. The desolate surface of Zirak began to violently fracture. The tiny, localized crater, where Austin had first touched the black dome, suddenly expanded into a massive, planet-spanning tectonic fault line. The heavy red sand, accumulated over countless generations, was blown straight into the stratosphere by an explosive surge of displaced air. The thick camouflage shell that had disguised the buried artifact for 5,000 years shattered into millions of microscopic pieces. From the deep, irradiated bowels of the dead world, the true form of the ancient warship finally ascended. It was not merely a vessel. It was a floating, metallic continent. The sheer, incomprehensible scale of Valiant defied all known engineering logic. Its massive, blade-like hull stretched across the horizon, casting a terrifying, impenetrable shadow that instantly eclipsed the crimson sun of the star system. Complete darkness enveloped the scrapyards below, as the 5,000-year-old super-dreadnought smoothly broke free from the planetary gravity well. Brilliant, blinding sapphire energy pulsed from its immense sublight engines, leaving a trail of ionized plasma that burned away the toxic clouds. The silence of its massive ascension was the most terrifying aspect. A machine the size of a small moon was moving through the atmosphere without producing a single decibel of mechanical noise, completely defying the laws of atmospheric friction. Panic, absolute and unfiltered, erupted across the entire Zenth orbital armada. Their hacked, centralized command nodes were screaming with critical collision warnings. The 342 heavy battlecruisers, previously holding a terrifying blockade over the planet, suddenly looked like insignificant metal insects hovering next to an ancient, indestructible Leviathan. In a desperate, uncoordinated frenzy, the local gunnery commanders overrode the paralyzed network and manually authorized a full-scale orbital bombardment. Thousands of modern neutron cannons and heavy plasma batteries simultaneously locked onto the rising black giant. The dark space above Zirak was violently illuminated by a massive, concentrated barrage of searing, destructive energy. The combined firepower possessed enough raw destructive force to completely melt the outer crust of a solid planet. Yet, as the blinding wave of energy slammed into Valiant, it did not even scorch the matte black paint on the hull. An invisible, multifaceted quantum displacement shield flared to life upon impact. The advanced energy barrier did not merely block the incoming attacks. It completely absorbed and scattered the kinetic energy, reducing the devastating neutron beams into harmless, glowing particles that gently washed over the hull like soft rain. The supreme orbital weaponry of the current ruling species was casually brushed aside with the exact same effort one would use to ignore a light breeze. Standing triumphantly above the broken body of the Zenth commander in the interrogation room, Austin watched the pathetic orbital bombardment through the ship's remote sensory feed. The Supreme Commander, coughing up dark biological fluid, sneered up at the human, expecting the ancient warship to unleash a catastrophic volley of return fire and vaporize the fleet. But Austin refused to validate their barbaric expectations. He was not a mindless destroyer. He mentally commanded Valiant to hold all primary weapon systems offline. Instead of responding with total annihilation, Austin authorized the deployment of a highly specialized suppression tactic. From the central spire of the massive predecessor dreadnought, a completely silent, low-resolution electromagnetic pulse violently erupted outward in a perfect expanding sphere. The invisible wave of disruptive energy washed directly through the entire Zenth armada. It bypassed their heavy armor plating completely and instantly overwhelmed every single active plasma relay within their engine cores. In less than 2 seconds, the terrified, flashing lights of the 342 cruisers suddenly went completely dark. Their heavy sublight engines sputtered and died abruptly. Their weapon banks instantly lost containment lock. The entire, supposedly invincible fleet of the mechanical overlords was completely paralyzed, reduced to nothing more than silent, powerless husks suspended helplessly in the cold vacuum of space. The king had returned, and he had simply turned off their toys. The profound silence of the paralyzed orbital battlefield was suddenly and violently shattered across the cosmos, not by weapons fire, but by a raw, unblockable data transmission. Deep within the glittering, hyper-advanced capital world of the Galactic Council, sheer panic erupted. The Grand Assembly Hall, a massive amphitheater constructed from polished crystal and illuminated by captured starlight, descended into absolute chaos. Every single holographic display, every secure communication terminal, and every private datapad belonging to the supreme leaders of the galaxy was forcefully hijacked. An unstoppable carrier wave, originating from a supposedly dead sector of the Outer Rim, overrode their primitive encryption protocols with effortless superiority. It projected a flawless, high-resolution live feed of the once mighty Zenth Armada, floating completely dead and helpless above the barren atmosphere of Xerak. The hundreds of alien dignitaries, representing the most powerful and wealthy species in the known universe, stared in horrified disbelief. They fully expected a terrifying alien monstrosity to appear on the broadcast and demand their immediate, bloody surrender. Instead, the visual feed shifted to the luminous, immaculately preserved command bridge of the ancient super dreadnought. Standing confidently at the center of the vast, glowing platform was a single human. Austin Banks did not wear the ceremonial armor of a conqueror. He still wore his heavily stained, battered salvage technician suit. Yet, the way he carried himself, the absolute, tranquil authority radiating from his posture, instantly silenced the entire galactic assembly. He did not yell. He did not threaten to burn their worlds. "Members of the Galactic Council," Austin began, his voice transmitting simultaneously into the native minds of every single representative through a flawless, instant neural translation matrix. "For centuries, you have systematically categorized my people as an inferior, unevolved anomaly. You have subjugated humanity, believing yourselves to be the absolute pinnacle of biological and technological achievement. You are entirely mistaken." Instead of charging weapons, Austin commanded Valiant to initiate the final sequence. He did not send a digital virus to the capital. He transmitted an ancient, highly compressed biological cipher directly into the medical mainframes of the Council. The moment the data packet integrated with their core systems, a massive holographic projection of the universal genetic tree illuminated the center of their grand hall. The cipher rapidly decoded the foundational DNA sequences of every single ruling species present. The shocking, undeniable truth unfolded before their terrified eyes in brilliant streams of interconnected light. Their complex genetic markers, their unique evolutionary traits, and their deepest biological instincts all traced backward, converging upon one single, undeniable point of origin. They were all manufactured. Every single dominant species in the galaxy had been carefully genetically engineered, seeded, and cultivated by the very race they currently enslaved. Humanity was not a weak, newly emergent pest struggling to survive at the bottom of the hierarchy. They were the absolute architects of the current cosmic ecosystem. They were the original creators who had willingly stepped away into the shadows, and they had just returned to inspect their vast, abandoned legacy. The sheer weight of this revelation completely crushed the immense arrogance of the galactic leaders. The supreme patriarchs and matriarchs of 1,000 worlds went from profound indignation to sheer, paralyzing awe in a matter of seconds. The political foundation of the entire universe collapsed instantly. They finally realized that humanity had never been a pawn on the cosmic chessboard. Humanity had carved the board itself, sculpted the pieces, and wrote the very rules of the game. Back aboard the disabled Zenth flagship, the localized gravity field within the interrogation chamber remained perfectly stable. Austin stood over the broken, trembling form of the Supreme Commander. He did not execute the massive cybernetic beast. He simply reached down, gripped the heavy armor plating, and dragged the defeated overlord toward the primary airlock. Austin threw the commander into a rudimentary escape pod, sealing the heavy reinforced glass behind him. "Take a clear message back to whatever scrap heap you call a capital," Austin commanded softly, his voice echoing through the pod intercom. "Earth has absolutely zero interest in reclaiming the broken, mismanaged empire we purposefully left behind. We will not conquer your worlds, nor will we demand your pathetic tribute. But hear this clearly, from this exact second forward, we will never again stand in the position of bowing to our own creations." Austin engaged the automatic launch sequence, violently ejecting the pod back toward the drifting, powerless armada. He then turned and walked slowly back to the central command dais of Valiant. He placed his hands firmly upon the glowing control interface. Through the massive transparent viewport of the bridge, he watched the impossible happen. Without a single physical command being issued, the massive, paralyzed Zenth battlecruisers began to slowly drift apart. Their emergency auxiliary thrusters engaged just enough to systematically part the vast blockade, silently forming a massive, incredibly wide corridor of honor. They were automatically yielding the right-of-way to their returning sovereign. The majestic, 5,000-year-old superweapon smoothly accelerated, leaving the toxic red atmosphere of Xerac far behind. It engaged its quantum slipstream drive, tearing a brilliant, silent hole through the very fabric of space and time. As the massive dark hull vanished into the infinite, glowing depths of the cosmos, the ultimate truth echoed across the stars. The history of the universe had just been fundamentally rewritten, and the true giants had finally awakened. Thank you so much to all the wonderful listeners for tuning in to the conclusion of this story. Where in the world are you currently listening from today? If you found today's story entertaining and wish to support our work, please consider helping us with just $1. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code directly on your screen, or by using the PayPal link provided in the description or the comments section of this video. Your generosity provides the budget to pay our hardworking staff, so they can feed their families and continue creating even better stories to serve you.